This is different.
I know that's what I said. I'm like,
Are these the upgraded ones?
Yes, we got the upgraded one, so just real quick, if you want to turn the mic on, just hit mic on.
Yeah.
Testing, testing.
And if you want
keep the mic off and you'll be happy to.
Yeah, click mic off if you want the mic off. There is a request to speak button. You don't have to use it. Just kind of raise your hand if you want. And then you'll have your voting buttons on there as well.
Yeah, if you want to make a sarcastic comment, just make sure the mic's off first.
Right?
Okay, so we'll have the call to order. Let's see. So we start with the pledge, so.
Yep.
Let's go ahead. Where's the flag? There it is. Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance.
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, agenda item C, roll call. Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Murphy,
Here.
Chu,
Here.
Kostecki,
Here.
Garcia,
Here.
and Chair Pizer.
Here.
Okay, Chair Pizer, I'd like to remind the audience that if they wish to address the commission, they must submit a green request to speak form located at the podium in the back of the chamber. Citizens can submit public comment on the commission electronically no later than 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Comments received before the deadline will be sent to the commission and will be part of the record and will be mentioned as part of the public comment portion of the agenda. Material may be emailed to cityclerk@cityofmerced.org and should be limited to 300 words or less. Any correspondence received after the 1 p.m. deadline will be distributed to the commission and retained for the official record. Agenda item D, public comment. And Chair Pizer, the clerk's office did not receive any public comments via email from any members of the public. And just for the record, there are no members of the public in the audience to leave a public comment for this meeting this evening. Okay, agenda item E, consent calendar. So we do have 2 items. Typically for consent, you can just vote on all items under consent in one vote if that's how you'd like to do it, or if anybody wants to do them individually, it is up to the commission.
I'm fine with all as one. Everyone else fine with that?
Cool. Okay, if we can just get a motion and a second.
Motion to accept the annual tax transparency, the agenda items.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Murphy and a second by, was it Commissioner Garcia? Okay. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes. Hold on. There we go. Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, agenda item F, reports. F1, Measure C, revenue and expense reports, December 31st, 2024, and March 31st, 2025. There you go. Yes, it was sent to you, I believe, last week via email, the whole packet, all the information.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Venus Rodriguez. I'm the Finance Officer for the City of Merced. And tonight I'll be presenting several reports for you. But the first one here will be for Measure C for the quarterly financial update for the current fiscal year. So in your packets, I know there's a few new members, but in your packets, we usually provide you a quarterly report on the financials for Measure C. And there's a lot of detail in that information. So if you have any questions, of course, I'd be happy to answer those. But I do present just a brief, some brief slides on where we are. So this slide is to show you just from inception of Measure C in 2005-06, what we've received through 23-24, and then what we budgeted for this current year. So we're right about the $9 million mark, receiving a little over $9 million in last fiscal year, and then that's what we're estimating to receive for the current year. So this slide shows you quarter over quarter. So the way that we track sales tax is typically per quarter. So this quarter shows you from fourth quarter of prior years to the next fourth quarter of the next year, and it compares it. So what you're seeing here, what we usually like to focus on is the most current quarter. So we've received a full fourth quarter receipts from the state, and then we compare that to the similar quarter last year. So as you can see, the reds are where we're decreasing in revenues, and the greens are when we're increasing in revenues quarter over quarter. And as you can see, the most recent quarter, we have decreased 75,000 approximately from the prior quarter, same time period. So as you can see, the last 4 quarters have been decreases. So that's what we've been seeing recently. So this gives you a little bit more detail about that quarter. So that quarter covers sales receipts from October through December of 2024. So this is typically our Christmas quarter, and we like to see good numbers here. So you can see we budget $9.1 million. Our fourth quarter revenues are about $2.3 million. We like to see it to be at least 25% of our budget. So we are seeing that at least, that it's 25.5% of our budget. So that meets the quarter mark. But in saying that, we are down from the prior quarter, as I mentioned, about 3.1% from a cash basis. Because we have the new Measure C that came online in April, we don't have any comparative analysis. HDL, which is our sales tax consultant, provides comparative analysis for us, and because they don't compare it to the old Measure C, they don't give us comparative analysis for this new Measure C. So I don't have specific comparative analysis for this quarter, but what I can give you is that we also receive 1% sales tax in the general fund. And so in the general fund, it tends to be similar as far as the major industry groups and what's up and what's down. So I do like to show you that the sales tax is up in the industry groups of restaurants and hotels and business and industry, autos and transportation, and the state and county pools. And where we're seeing the decreases mostly are in the general consumer goods, fuel and service stations, building and construction, and food and drugs. And general consumer goods is typically where we get the most of our sales tax. So that is the financial update. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions?
I have a question. Is there any reason or rationale of why we went down so much compared to the year prior?
We don't typically have a reason for it. It's just the way that the nature of how people are purchasing goods, right? So it really depends on if people are feeling financially secure. And so they tend to just spend money on things that are taxable. And when they're not financially secure, they tend to kind of hold that money and use it for groceries or, things that are, that you want to buy first before going to those things that are not necessarily needed.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question. You mentioned that usually the fourth quarter, we should see a bump because of the holiday season. So are the quarter-to-quarter change charts seasonally adjusted, or is it just based off of the previous quarter?
From a cash perspective, it's just based on the previous
just-
quarter.
I
But
see,
we do
okay.
have, that's where I don't have the comparative analysis. So typically what they do is they also adjust it for economic factors.
Okay.
And then we would see a little bit of a different percentage based on that.
Yeah, from a cash standpoint, it was at, 25.5%, but generally, fourth quarter should be higher, right, due to seasonal adjustment?
It can be, yes, but we haven't seen that, and
Correct.
we haven't seen increases in over a year, yeah.
No more questions?
Okay.
Okay, if we can get a motion and a second for this item.
Do we have a motion? Yeah, it's just to accept it, right?
Yes, it's accepting the information only and/or providing staff with direction as a recommendation to council.
I move to accept that report as information only.
Second?
Okay, and then the second was Chu?
Am I allowed to second?
Yeah, you can. I
I second
didn't
it.
look up when you said it, so
I was
just
asking a
confirming.
question. I didn't know I could second. If I can, then I will.
Yes. So I have a motion by Kostecki and a second by Pizer. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes.
I'm still shocked you got my name right.
Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. All right, next item is agenda item F2, review city manager recommended Measure C budget for 25-26 fiscal year revenue and expenditures.
So I'm back. Okay, so we will be presenting a budget to the city council on Monday. It will be the first of 3 presentations and discussions and direction that we'll get from council, and then finally adopting that budget the last meeting in June before our fiscal year starts. But for you tonight, I will be presenting what is included in our Measure C budget as far as the city manager recommended budget. So there's a lot of numbers on this. And so so typically we had one fund with the old Measure C. When the newly adopted Measure C came online, there were special requirements to that measure. 95% is required to go to public safety, 5% to roads. So what you're seeing here is the combination of all 3 funds. So the first one being the old Measure C, we still have a little bit of money left in that fund that had been holding there. And then the second, Fund 2030, is the Public Safety Fund. So this is 95% of all the sales tax we get from Measure C goes directly into this fund to be used for public safety. And then 5% goes into the Measure C roads, and that's where you get Fund 2031. So this is why under sales tax, you're seeing that we're estimating to get 0 for next year in the old Measure C. We're estimating a little over 8.6 million under public safety, and then 457,000 under the roads sales tax, which gets you a 9.1 million in total sales tax estimated for next year. Other revenue tends to be interest more than anything, and a little bit of grant funding. And then we have some transfers from the old Measure C, so we are still required. We have an SB1 maintenance of effort, which is a roads fund, but we are required to pay $145,000 of a maintenance of effort that comes from a general fund source. The old Measure C was determined to be a general, what the state would consider a general fund source, and so that is what we had been using to meet that maintenance of effort. And until we have no more funding in that old fund, we'll probably continue to do that. But at some point, if that money is completely used up, we would need to take that from just our general fund. But in the meantime, that's what that transfer is about. We have operating expenses, which is mostly personnel in the other, in public safety fund of $8.4 million. They don't really have any new big ticket items in the new Measure C funding source. And then we have a little bit of roads expense for an acquisition of a grinder for $300,000. So you're seeing expenditures here and some carrying over projects. So when you see capital improvement of 1.8 million, there's projects that have not been completed that will be carrying over into the new year. And so that there's no new projects in that funding there. So you have total expenditures of 11.3 million. That leaves us at $3.7 million of a fund balance after the end of next year. This does meet the GFOA recommended minimum. And if you're not familiar, new people are not familiar with that, is GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends that if you have operating, like if you're funding people more than anything, that you should have a recommended minimum that you're adhering to so that you're not using all of your funds in 1 year. And so the minimum recommended funding is to keep 2 months average of revenues and expenses. So when I say that 3.7 million at the ending balance meets recommended minimum, we've done that calculation, and the recommended minimum is about 1.6 million. So as long as we're keeping a $1.6 million balance at the end there, we're meeting that that requirement. And council made that a policy several years ago.
Question?
Yes.
What was the last page? It changed.
You want me to go back? Sure.
On the Fund 2001, the old Measure C, how much of that is directed to roads and how much to public safety?
As far as the expenditures
Yeah.
of the old,
Yeah.
so the 200,000 is a public safety acquisition, and then most of the rest of that is going to be for carrying over projects for roads. So I think the safe streets, sorry, that project, I can't remember it, but it's basically they're retrofitting all the lights. And so the bulk of that is for finishing that project. And then I believe the Quiet Zones project is in there too, which is also roads projects. So the bulk of that
That's
is,
considered to be a roads?
yeah, because they work on whatever they're doing is in the roads, and the roads, and so they consider that a roads project, yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So just to break down how the fund, or how the expenses are being recommended is that 60.8% is going towards personnel, 8.2% is going towards maintenance, supplies, and services, 8.1% is towards property, which is your acquisitions, 5.5% is administration, 1.4% is transfers, and then you have 16%, which is that capital 1.8 million. And just a couple of the bigger things here is what we did include in the budget this year is the purchase of a Type 6 engine for the fire department. The cost is $400,000, but we're splitting that cost between Measure C and Measure Y. So 50% will come from Measure C and 50% will come from Measure Y funding. And the other thing is that in the general fund, we did have trouble balancing the fund. And so we ended up taking maintenance, supplies, and services from their operating budget in the general fund and moving $150,000 between police and fire into Measure C to absorb some of that deficit. And as I mentioned in roads, there is a grinder being purchased for $300,000 that's being recommended to be purchased for next year, and then the project carryovers that we discussed, so the quiet zones and the safe streets lighting. So it's something that I guess grinds the road so that they can resurface. Scott could probably tell you a little bit better than I can. This is where Ken is not here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good question. It is a big grinder. They use it to tear down layers of asphalt to get it lower. It's really important. We have the equipment now to do overlays. We can do asphalt overlays. The problem is we don't have the equipment to kind of go underneath the surface and level it back out. So a lot of our overlays will have a lot of warping in it. They'll have slopes that we don't want to get. So essentially the grinder will let us clear off all that top stuff to get to a better base level. And we do the overlay, it'll look like a brand new street because it really is a brand new street. So that's the reason for it. Exactly. We've done a lot of overlays. I'll give you an example of a few spots. One of them is right in front of the fire station on 16th Street. Overlay was done there. That would have been a great spot to do a grind out, but instead there's a little bit of a bump up and kind of smooth out as good as it can be. But the grind will help us do it like a real professional job. Yeah.
How long will that last? Do you know? Approximately?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Many years. Many years. Yeah.
So that's the presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to
Any
answer those.
questions? I had one. The fire truck was 400,000. That's exactly or an estimate? Because that seems like a very exact number. Is there not taxes or anything?
Oh, yes, I'm sure there are taxes.
Yeah, I mean, that was just 400,000 exactly seems very, like, specifically, you know what I mean? It's like a
Until we
very
actually
specific number.
purchase the vehicle and get quotes or
Okay,
go
so
out
this
to
is just an
bid,
estimate
this
until you
is just
get
an
quotes.
estimate of
Okay,
kind
that
of the
was my
market
question.
value at this point in time that we know of.
Okay.
Right, Casey? Yeah, okay.
Any other questions?
I had a question. I think it was last year, the year before. I think it was the fire chief that made a presentation and kind of showed us which fire trucks were which ones. Is there any way that we can get a copy of that? I'm just curious because it was so detailed and it was so good. It was a lot of good information. And they had said, this truck is not just like this one, and they're all different. So I was just wondering if that's possible.
I'm sure we can find it, probably provide it in the next meeting.
Thank you.
Is there a way that we can see like year-over-year change to see in the different categories if there was any significant changes from the previous years in one expense category versus another?
Are you talking about budget expenditures? Or,
No, in the last.
in the financial update?
Yeah, in the financial update.
So you're
So there's a
talking,
breakdown of where all the expenditures are, like in terms of percentages of the overall budget, but is there a way to kind of see? Yeah, so for
Here.
example, is there a way to see kind of what this looks like relative to previous years? And if there are certain category that's accelerating a lot faster in cost versus another or something like that?
I can definitely provide that, but I can
Yeah.
also tell you it's the personnel. Personnel definitely increases the highest every year.
Okay.
Yeah, especially we just had labor increases, and so there was a very big jump.
That's administration?
Excuse me?
Is that administration?
Is what administration? The expenditure?
Salaries?
No, the personnel, sorry.
Oh, personnel,
Yeah.
excuse me, sorry.
I'm sure it is, otherwise you wouldn't have done it, but just to confirm that 150,000 being pulled for the operating expenses, that falls within the guidelines of the new Measure C
Oh, yeah, yes, because it's all public safety supplies and services. So it's for the use of operating for those departments.
within those departments.
Yes.
Understood, thank you.
I don't think there's any more questions, yeah?
So the ask for tonight on this item is to adopt a motion making a recommendation to the city council regarding the proposed 25-26 fiscal year budget. Not to say that if you have one or not, that's an option that you guys have for tonight.
Sorry, is there a budget here that was proposed?
Oh, so you're saying that, go for it.
Was there a proposed budget?
This is the budget.
It says 24-25, so you're talking about going from,
Sorry, this is the one on your screen now is the proposed budget.
oh,
So that it's three different funds.
Ending
And so,
6
so there's your
26.
budgeted revenue, budgeted expense.
A quick question. The revenue of that's generated from sales and use tax, is that based off of, what year are you guys basing off of to get an estimate of 9.1 million?
So we work very closely with our sales tax consultants, and so they provide forecasting for us.
I see.
So we also do our own trend analysis for several years. And so based on what we feel we're seeing within our area versus what HDL provides us, we kind of come up with a combination of, we think this is where it's going to be next year.
Okay, so is there a motion to, it's not adopt then, it would be to recommend?
Yeah, to make a recommendation.
To
the city
recommend
council.
to accept to the city council?
Yeah, I motion to recommend this budget to the city council.
I second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Chu and a second by Commissioner Garcia. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes. And the motion passes unanimously. Okay, agenda item F3, Measure Y Revenue and Expense Reports, December 31st, 2024 and March 31st, 2025.
Okay, so the next couple of reports are going to be very similar to the Measure C, only this is for Measure Y, which is our cannabis tax here at the city. So cannabis tax first was approved and came online back in fiscal year 1920. So as you can see, this first year was, I think we only collected for 1 to 2 quarters, so it wasn't very much. In that second year, though, you can see that huge increase. So at that time, we thought, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to get a lot of tax. We're going to be able to provide a lot of additional services. But lo and behold, in the next few years, between 22, 23, it really decreased in those years. And so now we're trying to figure out what a good baseline is for cannabis, because we haven't had a really good, steady revenue source of it since its inception. And so for 23, 24, we were estimating to receive $1.8 million. We only received about 1.6. For 24, 25, we then are estimating a little over $1.6 million. And this is very similar quarter. We collect by quarter, so to trend it and review it is the best way that we can, is to look at it quarter over quarter. So as you can see, several quarters now with reductions. This last quarter, which is the first of 2025, which would be your January through March timeframe, it did go down $55,000 from the prior quarter. And that is the financial update. So again, there's some detailed reports in your packet, but if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
I don't think there's any questions, yeah?
Okay, if we can get a motion and a second, just to accept the information as information only.
Make a motion to accept the report.
Okay.
A second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Murphy and a second by Commissioner Kostecki. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes. Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. All right, agenda item F4, review city manager recommended Measure Y budget for 25-26 fiscal year revenue and expenditures.
So this will now be the city manager recommended budget for Measure Y. So the difference between the last slide and the financial update I showed you and this slide is that now I've put in, I gave you what we were budgeting for 24, 25, and this is what we are estimating for it to come in. So we are estimating that we will get about 1.6 million, and we're estimating very similar for next year, a little over 1.6 million. So again, we're still trying to get a good baseline for what we'll get annually. So Measure Y is a little bit different in the sense that the measure was passed with very specific requirements. So we're supposed to give police 20% of whatever we receive, fire will get 20%, and then Parks and Recreation will get 20%. And then we'll have a discretionary portion of 40%, but that 40% can still only be used for these 3 areas. So then it becomes how council wants to direct the use of that 40%. And since its inception, they've pretty much allocated towards parks and towards recreation. So that's typically who would get that. And then in the last, I don't know if it was last, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, we recommended that they continue to use 50% of it towards parks, towards recreation, and then the other 50% towards parks. So you'll see that in the presentation as we move on. But in total, for all cannabis tax, we are estimating, as I mentioned, a little over 1.6 million. Again, other revenue is just interest we're estimating for those funds. And then we have so the reason there's a transfer in and it kind of goes plus and minus is because this is the discretionary portion paying into Parks and Recreation for parks funding. And so that's where you're getting the 311,155. The transfer out is funding going from Measure Y to Parks and Recreation operating fund. So it's going out to a completely different fund and it's supplementing their programs in that fund. And so that leaves total estimated expenses of 1.5 million, and we're having an ending balance here of $206,000. So in the police department, they are proposing to use the allocated Measure Y funding to fund their reserve officer program, to fund a temporary dispatcher, a temporary sergeant. They typically have fleet repairs that are unanticipated, so they like to set aside funding to repair the PD vehicles. And then again, similar to how we moved in operating maintenance supplies and services to Measure C, we also had to move in some funding from the police department and the general fund into Measure Y. So we moved in $124,000 from the general fund into Measure Y for maintenance supplies and services. On the fire side, they are proposing to use funding for thermal imaging cameras, for self-contained breathing apparatus, and again, the Type 6 engine. So this is the other 50% would come out of Measure Y. And then again, moving some of the general fund operating budget into Measure Y of $150,000. Parks and Recreation, so with the 20%, so the way that we balance their budget is they get their program revenues, but their program revenues will never sustain their fund. So they get supplemented by the general fund, and now they're also being supplemented by Measure Y. So as I mentioned, the 20% allocation of Measure Y for Parks and Recreation is $337,300. And then they will also get the 50% of the 40% discretionary portion. So that's an additional $337,300. And then the general fund, they got an increase in what was allocated to them from last year of 1.4%. And so they have a total transfer of a little over 1.6 million. And they have a total operating budget of $3.2 million. So this just helps to supplement those expenditures. Something that's new in this year is that we're anticipating the new Merced Regional Sports Complex to come online, also known as CP42 at this point until it's named. So we are adding some funding in there for that maintenance. That park is actually supposed to be part of a bigger JPA with several partner organizations in the city. But until that's formed and everybody understands what their cost allocation will be of that park and how that's all going to work, we've added some initial costs so that we can at least get the park up and running and for use for the community. So there's about $83,000 that is in Parks and Recreation to support that park. So some of the program incomes, so as I mentioned, it has been a challenge to balance the general fund. And because the general fund supplements Parks and Recreation, that meant that they were not able to get as much of the allocation that they might have normally gotten, or we were not able to increase it to help offset some of the increases in costs in their budget. So some of the program incomes and impacts and where they chose to reduce some of their budget was by reducing the lease with Boys and Girls Club by $25,000. So typically every year we help the Boys and Girls Club with $25,000 to support their programs. And that's actually being removed for next year. That's also similar with other of the smaller community centers. With some of the organizations, we would help fund some of the utilities for them, but they chose to reduce that in the agreement, so that helped to save another $5,000. Something else that the Parks and Recreation staffing is doing is requesting contributions from Merced City School Districts to help with youth sports, to help fund that program. And so they've already been given about $20,000, approved for $20,000, but they're going to try for another $60,000. They did, we are recommending to delete a full-time zookeeper. We had added a zookeeper a few years ago where there was a contribution that was paying for half. Well, that contribution ended, and so that can no longer be supported. They're eliminating the summer camp program, they're eliminating stick to fitness sports clinics, and they're eliminating the block party trailer for community reservations. So then there was so for the discretionary portion, the 40%, I guess, we talked about how half of that would go to recreation programming, so that's your 337,300. And then we also have included for parks funding, so we're adding $100,000 for tree trimming, $60,000 for bike path maintenance, and then some park improvements. We typically allocate some money for just repairs at parks and playgrounds. So we've added 50,000. Zoo roof repairs of 6,000. There's Joe Herb upper of 25,000, and then we're adding 69,000 just for replacements of handles, security latches, park restroom partitions citywide. So that is the presentation, if you have any questions.
I have a few questions, but anyone else want to? Go ahead, go ahead.
I just wanted, if we go back to where the fire, a little bit further out, right there, so thermal imaging cameras and self-contained breathing apparatus, what exactly are those?
Well, it's a good thing the fire chief is here.
Good evening, Commission. Thermal imaging cameras, also referred to as TICs, are basically cameras, technology that we carry on our PPE, basically connected to us when we go inside of a fire. It allows us to identify things like where the fire is located, or more importantly, if there's somebody down in the fire. It basically is thermal technology that allows us to see through the smoke, for lack of better terms. So that's what thermal imagers are. Our current cameras are about 12 years old, and they're at end of life. We usually send them off for repairs, but they're at the point where they can't even repair them now. So we're going to replace those. And then the self-contained breathing apparatus, this is actually additional bottles. So we actually received a grant from FEMA 2 years ago, and we replaced all of our self-contained breathing apparatuses, but they only allow us to replace one bottle, or the grant only allowed one bottle per pack. So this is additional bottles. So if we have a large incident, we don't have the ability to fill our air, replace our air on scene. So it gives us some additional capacity when we have either large incidents or incidents where we have multiple fires back to back. We don't have time to go back and fill our bottles with air. So.
For the cameras, how many do you guys need?
We replaced half of them. It was some mid-year funding, which I think was 5, and I think this is an additional 5, I believe. And then the bottles, we replaced half of the bottles, or added half the bottles we needed in the mid-year funding, which I believe was 9, and this will be an additional 9 bottles, I believe. No, I'm sorry. I think it was 15 and 15. Don't quote me on the numbers. And just for a little additional information, you had asked about the fire engines. The Type 6 fire engine, that is what we refer to as a squad. So you're probably seeing the smaller fire engine around town. It's like a pickup with a utility box on the back. That's a squad is what we call it, but it's also referred to as a Type 6 engine. That's what we're looking to purchase an additional one of those. So a little different than the full-size fire engines. The full-size fire engine is about 1.2 million. The ladder truck's about 2.5 million.
Any other questions?
I had a question about the park program reductions. I don't know if you're the right person to direct this question.
But we
to.
have the right
Oh, yeah,
person,
great.
so we're good.
Come on down.
I'm just wondering, is the idea that the sports complex with new kind of options there kind of offsets the cuts in other places? Or those programs that were cut just kind of underutilized and not worth the money?
Yeah, so a couple of responses to that. First, Chris Jensen, Parks and Community Services Director. Can we go back to that one where the cut was here? So CP42, or the Regional Sports Complex, this is just an expense projection. We don't have revenue projections yet. built into this because we're pending the Joint Power Authority development that Venus referred to earlier. That'll be a collaboration between our county partners, MCOE, and the high school district that entered an agreement to help run the facility. So what those revenues are going to bring in is going to be determined by that JPA partnership. So what you see here is just the expenses. The facility utilities, for example, really high, $47,000. It's a fairly conservative estimate based on similar facilities that we have at a smaller scale, but they're a lot older. McNamara Park is an example. Our hope is that it would come in significantly less than that, but we're just erring on the side of caution. Because of those additional expenses, we are reducing some of the contributions that we've historically given to some of our nonprofit partners. The city has subsidized the use of community centers and youth centers historically by nonprofit partners. So we were looking at eliminating what those contributions were, reducing them based on those nonprofits' current capacity. And those discussions were had preliminary to this budget projection. So everybody's explained that they're comfortable with these cuts. At this point, they're in a position to actually absorb them. So that's a good thing. The deletion of the full-time zookeeper, that was a commitment that we made at the inception of that position being brought on to the department because we knew that it was a grant-funded position. City, didn't have the means at the time, nor do we today, to subsidize that moving forward. So that cut was made there. The summer camp, to your point, it's redundant at this point in time. The City of Merced School District, as well as other elementary schools, get ELOP funding, which is really subsidizing an extreme onslaught of after school, before school, and school break programs that didn't exist a few years ago, where the city and some of our nonprofits that you see experiencing the cuts here were the sole resource for after school or summer break programming. So looking at the adjustments that were recommended for our budget, it seemed like those were obvious cuts to make that weren't going to make a major dent to the community services being offered here in Merced. Similar to the Stick to Fitness and the Block Party trailer, initially when Measure Y was brought on, the Parks and Community Services Department was allowed to invest in some new amenities, much like the equipment that you heard Fire and PD discuss that they're bringing on. One of the equipment items that was brought on was a Block Party trailer, and the concept behind that was we would bring the recreation party to you. If you had a free community event that we could support, we would bring PA systems, benches, activities, yard games, things of that nature. It's extremely expensive. We have to have somebody that can drive a truck with a trailer that tows behind, limited liability to make sure they can meander between neighborhoods, et cetera, and fulfill those commitments. We are still going to operate the Block Party trailer. It will just be to support city functions, what we offer as a department. So things like our Movies in the Park, shameless plug, it starts this week, this Friday. At the downtown Karmagar Theater, Friday at 7. The other things that we'll do, like mayor park cleanups, things like that are kind of annual commitments for us to support. What we'll be eliminating here is things like if Peterson Elementary had a 50-year celebration of their school, and they wanted us to go and support that event, we would no longer do those external commitments. So we still have the equipment in operation. It'll just be pared back to support our operations.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful.
You're welcome.
While you're there, can I ask you a couple questions?
Please.
About CP 42?
Please.
Has names been considered?
No.
No, not yet. Okay.
Yeah, we have discussed it. So different probably agenda item for a future date maybe, but.
Probably Parks and Rec, not us too, but I was just curious.
Just, yeah, we'll definitely, these taxes.
I don't want it named after me.
These taxes are helping for sure with that facility. So at some point in time, you may want to know a little bit more, but the north section is under conceptual design. The contractor that we have working on that conceptual design is also developing a pro forma for us to determine what type of revenue we should be generating out there to cover the expenses. And one of the things that they actually recommended is reserving naming rights and leveraging fields and venues to be named because those can change over time and that revenue stream is more passive as opposed to a one-time investment that somebody could make for an entire complex. The other thing is, you know, with this development of the north being allocated towards the property, we're now looking at a potential 80-acre sports complex, not a 40-acre sports complex. So we don't want to prematurely name the south and then tie ourselves to that commitment when we're looking to build out at 80 acres.
Okay, one more question. When I was on Parks and Rec, I remember there was baseball, softball, and it was primarily soccer, but also baseball and softball. When you say it's going to be opening, is all of those going to open or just one of them?
No, good question. So the south portion, that's the city-owned property right now, that's primarily soccer, football, mixed-use fields. And then pickleball courts will have 8. We have 2 blacktops. For basketball, we also have a futsal court. And
You have a futsal court?
Futsal court.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Merced County Office of Education. They contributed $600,000 for us to build that. It's not indoor, it is outdoor, but it is solid surface. So we can do Special Olympics tournaments there with MCOE. We can do community recreation or tournaments, competitive tournaments there as well. And then we'll have an all-inclusive playground on the south side. The north parcel is under design right now, and there's actually a community survey that I believe wraps up this week. If you go to Parks and Community Services or Parks and Rec Facebook page, you can still access that and give your input on what you want to see to the north.
Are the fields turf or grass?
Natural grass.
Oh, yes, I hate turf.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I had a question. Where is the sports complex? Where do you guys?
It's on the corner of Tyler and Mission. So many are familiar with the Campus Parkway exit off of Highway 99. If you go south instead of northeast, you will run into the corner of Tyler and Mission, and the complex spans from there to about halfway down Tyler towards Girard.
And it's in the process of being built, is that what you said?
Yeah, so the city's contributed, including Measure Y, some Measure Y funds, a lot of ARPA funding that was allocated to the city, over $10 million at this point. We have about 2/3 of the southern portion under construction right now, and we are hoping to open in spring of 2026.
And then what exactly is it going to have besides, I mean, obviously sports, but what sports, and are there gonna be like locker rooms, there's gonna be swimming pool, like what do you guys have on?
No locker rooms, no swimming pool. One of the things we heard from our consultant doing the analysis of the feasibility study for the complex was aquatics is really, really difficult to cover the cost of. It's actually one of the amenities that the city of Merced has an abundance of right now between the high schools and our 2 public pools that we have. So mainly soccer, football, basketball, pickleball. Those are the sports that we're investing in on the southern portion. The 40 acres that was that's adjoining the property that was allocated to the project has yet to be committed. So we are looking at some other things like indoor facilities, softball, baseball. What does the community and market really dictate that should go there? Noted. Welcome.
Put your input in.
I have a quick question for police. Anybody else have anything for Chris before I ask real quick? I just wanted to add a quick question for police. If you guys have noticed the trend ever since Measure Y is in place, if there has been an increase or a noticeable increase in cannabis-related responses, and whether overall this has been sort of a net positive in terms of, funding for the police versus additional resources or expenses allocated towards cannabis-related responses. So I just want to know if it's been a net positive for you guys at least.
Well, I mean, for Measure Y, it is good for us to get that tax base. I mean, it started off hot and now it's dropped off. Me personally, I think it's because the businesses are underreporting what they're actually selling, but that's stuff that we have to work on with the state. But yeah, I mean, it's always a benefit for us, because for us, we use that to buy, we can't use it to buy staff to, pay for a position. So we use it to get equipment for all the equipment that we might need through the year, unexpected things that happen, like this last year. One of them, we had overabundance of police cars that were wrecked and they were expensive to fix. So there was a nice little fund to use to get those cars fixed, because gotta have the cars.
And at least cannabis-related responses have not been problematic or bogged down, at least on resources or time or response or anything like
Yeah,
that.
no, I mean, a lot of people, you go around town, there's people that will smoke marijuana.
Yeah.
It is there. It's not as problematic as what we're dealing with fentanyl. There isn't a week that goes by where our officers are responding out to administer Narcan to somebody.
I had a question as well. So the money for fixing vehicles that is what was the slide? What did it say? It was like $76,000. Is that normally what it is, or is this more or less? Because, you know, as our cars age, they need more maintenance. So is this, what is the age of the cars? Are you expecting that to go up, down with cars?
Well, for us, a big part of it, I mean, after COVID, a lot of the prices of specific parts went up.
Yeah.
We're transitioning back over to the Ford Explorers. When we still have some of the Dodge Chargers that are out there, the smaller sedans that you guys see. We get a lot of like minor accidents where it's previously it would have cost $1,000, $2,000 to fix front end damage. With the Dodge Chargers, we started seeing $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 because they had a lot of alignment issues. So that's why we're kind of going away from that. I mean, we want our officers to drive safe and not hit anything, but cost of doing business, they're going to hit a curb. Things are going to happen. And we've seen the costs come down quite a bit when we have these minor accidents with the Ford Explorers. So we do anticipate those to come down. We are transitioning over. We have 10 coming. 4 just came in, and they have to get outfitted with equipment. So in the next couple months, we'll start getting those out. Some of the older vehicles, including some of the Dodges, will come offline, and then we'll have the new Ford Explorers out there.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, so this item is just to make a recommendation to the city council regarding the proposed city manager's budget for Measure Y. So if we can get a motion and a second.
I'll motion.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Chu and a second by Commissioner Garcia. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. All right, agenda item G, business. G1, request to add item to future agenda.
Is there anything, you wanted them to add about did you still want to, what exactly did you ask?
I wanted that PowerPoint that they presented to us, I would like a copy of it because I
Yeah.
find it very interesting to see.
That's something we can probably just email it to
email,
everybody,
yeah.
yeah.
It was mentioned a little bit about the safe lights. Would we have, I don't remember when they said they were going to be installed. Will we be able to have a number of how many are installed by the next time we meet and where? Okay. And then for me, I would like to know any upcoming roads that are going to be repaved or I know off of Yosemite, because I work at Merced College, so I see the traffic. But there in Yosemite, I know that they're fixing the road. We're making changes to it. I'm not sure what the changes are, but just any updates, that would be good. Or just any updates on new roads or fixed roads would be good too.
Anything else?
Oh, okay. Agenda item G2, commissioner comments.
Oh, I do believe this is my last meeting. I don't think I'm gonna renew because my kids are getting older. My son has a baseball game right now, so it's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Maybe when they're older, I'll try to re-up, but thank you for having me.
Okay, so with that, agenda item H, adjournment.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Murphy and a second by Commissioner Garcia. Chair and commissioners, please cast your votes. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody.
I get to bang the hammer one more time, right?
Yay.